So think about the last time you were in a really tense meeting.
Right.
Like your body is sitting there, but it's making this definitive choice about whether you are perfectly safe or honestly in mortal danger. And it does this milliseconds before your conscious brain even registers what your colleague just said.
Oh, absolutely. Long before you process it.
Right, long before you can logically process, say, a passive-aggressive comment or some unexpected shift in a project timeline. By that point, your nervous system has already hijacked the control room. So, have you ever found yourself in one of those moments? Maybe a high-pressure negotiation or, I don't know, a really fraught conversation with a family member?
Oh, yeah. We all have.
And you feel like you're just watching yourself react on autopilot, like you're totally disconnected from your actual values, just saying whatever you need to say to survive the interaction.
Yeah.
And somewhere in the back of your mind, you're wondering, like, who is this stranger operating my mouth right now?
It is a profoundly unsettling experience. But, it is practically a universal one. You know, you are physically taking up space in the room, but internally, your core self has completely left the building.
Left the building,
Yeah,
exactly.
the lights are on, but the actual homeowner has fled out the back door.
Which is such a crazy feeling. And that exact phenomenon is really the foundation of today's deep dive. We are exploring the book Leading with Presence, and we're specifically focusing our attention on Chapter 2, which details what the text calls the architecture of presence.
Right. The architecture.
So our mission today for this deep dive is to unpack why we habitually abandon ourselves under pressure, right? How our biological wiring actually dictates our emotional stability. And then finally, the cascading impact our internal state has on relational trust and conflict resolution.
It's a huge topic, and to properly set the stage for that architecture, we really have to establish a baseline rule from the text. And this rule, it completely shatters how corporate culture usually treats this topic.
Okay, I'm ready.
The rule is, this presence is not a personality trait.
Wow. Okay, that feels like a massive paradigm shift because, we usually categorize presence as a genetic lottery win,
Well,
right?
completely.
We assume it belongs exclusively to the extroverted leader with the, naturally booming, calm voice, or that charismatic person who can hold a room captive without breaking a sweat.
Right, right. We constantly conflate presence with temperament or performance, really. But the text defines presence as a structural internal capacity. It is a highly specific skill.
A skill, not a trait.
Exactly. It
Yeah.
can be cultivated by anyone, regardless of whether they are an introvert or an extrovert. It's essentially the ability to stay connected to yourself and to reality without disappearing into a curated performance or a knee-jerk reaction. It is, it's the state of being fully inhabited.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if presence is an architecture we build internally, I feel like we first need to identify the wrecking ball.
Right.
Chapter 2 focuses heavily on the specific forces that consistently tear us away from our center.
And they are powerful forces.
Yeah. And the materials suggest that people don't generally lose themselves all at once in some grand, dramatic failure. It's more like they lose themselves in micro moments.
Yes. They surrender their presence through a series of, subtle, unexamined concessions. And while the text identifies several culprits that facilitate this loss, two of the most insidious are our relationship to urgency and our reliance on performance habits.
Urgency and performance.
Right. So let's look at urgency first, because it operates like an invisible toxin in modern work environments. Urgency physically narrows our cognitive awareness.
Like tunnel vision.
Exactly like tunnel vision. It puts immediate artificial pressure on the nervous system, tricking the brain into believing that an immediate reaction is the only path to safety.
It creates this illusion that moving fast equals having control over the chaos.
Yes. And so, under that pressure, people completely abandon discernment for speed. They fire off an email before they actually settle internally, or they speak before they have truly listened to the nuance of what was just said.
We've all been there. Hitting send and immediately regretting it.
The text calls this overfunctioning. When the environment feels unstable, we overfunction. We micromanage. We dominate the conversation. We try to fix problems that haven't even fully materialized yet.
We're just doing things to do things.
All because we mistakenly believe that maintaining a frantic velocity will restore our equilibrium. But the underlying mechanism there is just fear. The frantic activity actually pulls us further away from the grounded reflective center that's required to make a truly wise decision.
Okay, I have an analogy for this. It's kind of like encountering a maze, right? And deciding the best strategy is to sprint full speed into the walls rather than just pausing for a second to look at it from an elevated vantage point.
There's a perfect way to put it. You're just hitting walls faster.
Yeah. Which brings us to the second force, pulling us out of ourselves, performance habits.
And this one is perhaps the more subtle of the two, because performance is heavily rewarded in our society. This involves the mechanisms we use to manage a room, rather than simply being in it.
Managing the room. Wow.
Yeah. So a person might carefully curate their tone to maintain approval from a superior, or they might shapeshift their opinions in real time to avoid ruffling feathers.
Just constantly adapting.
Right. They become hypervigilant at reading the expectations of others and then contorting themselves to fit that exact mold.
So they basically become a chameleon.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the text emphasizes that the cost of that shapeshifting is a devastating loss of internal coherence, because over time, the image they project into the room becomes far more practiced than their own honesty.
That's chilling, actually.
It creates a severe psychological split between the self that is actually being lived internally and the self that is being broadcasted to the world. When you dedicate the majority of your cognitive resources to maintaining an artificial image, your true presence necessarily weakens. You are starving your authentic setter to feed an avatar.
Okay, I think of it like managing a smartphone, right? It's not just that you have a few background apps open. It's that your quote-unquote performance app is actively hijacking your phone's RAM to render a flawless 3D avatar of yourself that the room will approve of.
Right.
While at the same time, your urgency app is simultaneously maxing out your processor with relentless false threat notifications. The system just overheats. Your internal battery drains at a terrifying rate, and eventually the entire operating system crashes. You completely lose contact with the actual user.
The processor simply cannot handle the load of simultaneously defending against perceived urgent threats and rendering a flawless social performance. It just breaks down.
Which raises a really crucial question for you. If these habits, like urgency and performance, drain our battery and destroy our presence, why on earth do we automatically default to them the second we feel stressed? I mean, if it's self-sabotage, why is it our immediate go-to?
What's fascinating here is that framing them as bad habits entirely misses the point.
Oh, really?
Yeah, these are deeply ingrained survival adaptations. They were formed somewhere along the line, often in early childhood or maybe in highly toxic past work environments. They were built to help us cope with instability, to keep us safe from criticism, or to ensure we remained part of the tribe.
Oh, so they worked at one point.
Exactly. They served a vital protective purpose at a time when we lacked better tools. The architectural flaw isn't that we have these responses. The flaw is that we allow mechanisms designed for mere survival to take the steering wheel in moments that require nuanced leadership.
Wow. Okay, so if these reactions are hardwired survival mechanisms, then we aren't just fighting bad workplace etiquette. We are actively fighting our own evolutionary biology.
They really are.
And that bridges us directly into the inner mechanics detailed in Chapter 2, right? How our physical body actually dictates our stability.
Yes. We have to examine the nervous system. The text explicitly identifies the nervous system as the hidden architect of presence. We carry around this arrogant assumption that we are completely rational, logic-driven beings.
Yeah, we like to think we're so smart.
Right. But the reality is governed by a biological process called neuroception. Before a conscious verbal thought even forms in your prefrontal cortex, your nervous system has continuously scanned the environment and decided if you are safe or threatened.
It's like a submarine sonar just pinging the dark water before the captain is even awake.
That's it, exactly.
Oh.
And when it perceives a threat, it bypasses logic entirely. And I think it's important to clarify what constitutes a threat to the modern nervous system, because we aren't talking about fleeing a predator in the woods here.
No, we're in an office building.
Right. To the brain, a threat is a micro-expression of disgust on a client's face. It's an ambiguous two-word email from your manager, or that looming silence in a room after you pitch an idea.
Oh, I hate that silence.
We all do, because the brain's amygdala interprets those social and emotional threats with the exact same biological alarm system it uses for physical danger.
Wait, really? The exact same alarm?
The exact same one. And once that alarm is pulled, it effectively shuts down the prefrontal cortex. That's the part of your brain responsible for complex problem-solving, empathy, and emotional regulation. So you literally lose access to your highest cognitive functions.
That explains so much.
Right. And in their place, the nervous system triggers those protective states we just outlined.
It deploys the defense mechanisms.
Precisely. The physiological shift manifests as defensive posturing, or a complete emotional shutdown and withdrawal, or intense people-pleasing and fawning, or, emotional spillover, where a person's anxiety essentially vomits all over their team.
We've all seen that happen.
That is just your nervous system doing its job. It's trying to shield you from perceived harm. But in doing so, it severely narrows your access to reflection and grounded choice.
Okay, so if our amygdala is constantly hijacking our logic to protect us and basically cutting off our access to empathy and reason,
Right.
how do we ever rebuild that architecture? What is the manual override switch to get the prefrontal cortex back online?
So the text introduces a critical intervention called the practice of return.
The practice of return. All right.
Return is the active, intentional movement of coming back to yourself when you have been pulled into that biological reactivity. It is not about pretending the stressor doesn't exist. And it certainly isn't pasting a fake, toxic positivity smile over your genuine frustration.
That's a huge relief.
Yeah. It is the practice of noticing the internal disruption without abandoning yourself to it.
Okay, but what are the actual mechanics of that? How does someone execute a return when their heart rate is spiking at 120 beats per minute during a board meeting?
It looks remarkably small from the outside, but it is physiologically profound on the inside. You initiate a return through minor physical interventions that signal safety to the body.
Like what?
It might be intentionally slowing the cadence of your breath. It might be actively softening your jaw, which is actually a major site of sympathetic nervous system tension.
Really? The
Wow.
jaw?
Oh yeah, we hold so much stress there. Or it could be unclenching your hands under the conference table. Or simply internally naming the reality of your physiological state.
Mm-hmm.
Silently stating, I am activated right now. My pulse is racing, and I am moving into protection mode.
Wow. So by naming the activation, you are forcing the logical part of your brain to observe the emotional part rather than just being consumed by it.
Yes, that observation creates a tiny, vital wedge of space between the nervous system's automated alarm and the action you're about to take. Softening the jaw or lengthening the exhale, it actively stimulates the vagus nerve, which acts as the brake pedal for your fight-or-flight response.
So you are using biology to hack biology.
Exactly.
But wait, let me push back on this slightly, because I can hear a skeptic listening to this right now and thinking it sounds a bit naive.
Sure, lay it on me.
If you are in the middle of a massive corporate crisis, right?
Okay.
A multi-million-dollar project is literally failing, or a critical partnership is actively falling apart, doesn't focusing on softening your jaw or taking a deep belly breath essentially mean you are suppressing your true, justified emotions just to force a performative calm? It sounds like putting a tight lid on a boiling pot and pretending the water isn't hot.
That is the most common misconception surrounding this work.
Mm-hmm.
And the text is very rigid in its clarification of this exact point.
Yeah.
Physiological regulation is categorically not suppression.
Okay.
It is not emotional numbness, and it is definitely not self-erasure to make other people comfortable.
So define the boundary there. How does the mechanism of regulation differ from the mechanism of suppression?
Suppression is pretending the plot isn't boiling.
Right.
It is shoving the emotion down into the basement of your body and locking the door, which inevitably leads to an explosion later. Regulation, on the other hand, is the capacity to remain in relationship with your emotion without being overtaken by it. Regulation is feeling the intense heat of the boiling water, fully acknowledging that you are furious or terrified, but actively choosing not to stick your bare hand into the pot.
Wow.
And choosing not to throw that boiling water onto the colleague sitting next to you. You maintain the capacity to feel deeply without spilling your internal chaos everywhere.
So you're basically building a stronger container for the heat rather than trying to cool the water down.
That's a beautiful way to say it.
Yeah.
And the true power of the practice of return lies in neuroplasticity. Every single time you pause, soften your physical tension, and name your activation instead of blindly reacting, you are literally rewiring your inner architecture.
That's incredible.
You are laying down new neural pathways. You are teaching your body a radically new baseline reality that, as the text states, disruption does not have to become direction.
Disruption does not have to become direction. I love that. Like if someone cuts you off in traffic, the disruption is the spike in adrenaline.
Right. It's exactly.
The direction is whether you decide to spend the next 20 minutes aggressively tailgating them. You have the agency to decide that a temporary loss of balance does not require you to walk tilted for the remainder of the week.
You learn to recover your center with skill and self-compassion, rather than spiraling into shame over the fact that you lost your balance in the first place.
Mastering this internal physiological regulation is clearly a superpower for personal resilience. But, none of us are operating in a vacuum. We lead teams, we collaborate with difficult personalities, we navigate complex family dynamics.
Always.
If you successfully hack your vagus nerve and keep your prefrontal cortex online, how does that translate when you are staring down someone whose amygdala is fully hijacked?
Well, this is the critical transition point in Chapter 2. This is where presence graduates from a solitary wellness practice into a potent relational force. The architecture of presence becomes glaringly visible during interpersonal conflict.
The ultimate stress test.
Yes. Conflict is the ultimate stress test for everything we've discussed. When two people are fully disconnected from their respective centers during an argument, genuine communication ceases to exist. They are listening solely through the filter of defensiveness, and they are speaking entirely from their biological activation.
It's just two dysregulated nervous systems throwing threat responses at one another, completely bypassing logic.
And nobody wins in that scenario. Nobody.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The text makes this profound observation about how maintaining your own presence fundamentally alters the actual mechanics of listening during a conflict.
It changes everything.
Yeah, like a grounded person isn't just processing the literal vocabulary the other person is using. They are anchored enough to hear the emotional reality vibrating beneath those words.
They're listening for meaning rather than listening for ammunition.
Yes, because normally when we are activated, we aren't listening at all. We are just frantically utilizing the time the other person is speaking to formulate our brilliant counter-argument.
Right.
We are building our defense case.
We're just waiting for our turn to speak.
Exactly. But if your prefrontal cortex is online, you actually possess the cognitive bandwidth to receive the message being delivered.
And that specific quality of listening is the bedrock of relational trust. The text is very clear that trust is not manufactured through, corporate policies or perfectly worded mission statements.
Thank goodness.
Right. It's not even necessarily built by what a leader says. Trust is built by the quality of personhood an individual brings into an exchange. When you maintain an embodied presence with someone who is angry or fearful, you provide them with an experience where they feel, and this phrasing from the text is vital here, met rather than managed.
Met rather than managed. Let's hover on that concept for a second. Because being managed is a universally recognizable, deeply unpleasant sensation.
Oh, we all know how it feels.
When someone is managing you, you can feel their subtle condescension. You feel like a logistical problem they are trying to solve, or an obstacle they are trying to bypass so they can get back to their day. It is inherently transactional.
Yes. It signals to your nervous system that you are not truly seen or valued as a human being in that moment. But when you are met, the dynamic shifts entirely. Your own dysregulated nervous system begins to detect the calm, grounded state of the person sitting across from you.
Just naturally.
Because we are mammals, our nervous systems constantly communicate and synchronize with one another, which brings up an unavoidable truth for anyone in a leadership position. Presence is highly contagious.
Just through proximity.
Through a biological process called co-regulation. Think about the inverse, which is just as true fragmentation is contagious.
Oh, that makes sense.
Right? If a manager bursts into a room with frantic energy, operating entirely out of urgency and emotional unpredictability, the physical bodies of everyone in that room will tighten. The team's collective amygdala fires.
And they immediately begin shape-shifting to protect themselves.
Exactly. They withhold bad news, they walk on eggshells, and creativity just plummets.
Yeah.
The leader's internal, unregulated chaos instantly becomes the team's external operational reality.
So a single dysregulated nervous system at the top of a hierarchy can infect an entire department. But by the laws of co-regulation, a deeply grounded leader can reverse engineer that effect.
A grounded individual essentially acts as an anchor for the entire room. If they can hold intense tension without collapsing into protective posturing or emotional spillover, they actively dissipate what the text refers to as the relational fog.
The relational fog.
They broadcast biological safety. And in a climate of safety, the people around them feel secure enough to drop their own performance habits, speak with genuine honesty, and access their own highest cognitive functions.
So what does this all mean? Like, if a listener is absorbing this right now and they know they have to walk into a hostile performance review at an hour or sit down for a notoriously difficult Thanksgiving dinner this evening, what is the core structural takeaway for handling that tension?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it requires a complete reevaluation of what a successful conflict looks like. The goal of conflict resolution is not about utilizing the right communication framework to make the tension magically evaporate.
Right.
That is an impossible fantasy. True conflict resolution, fueled by presence, is entirely about changing how the tension is held.
So you aren't trying to defuse the bomb. You are trying to build a much safer container to hold the explosive material.
By maintaining your practice of return, by consciously keeping your jaws soft, your breathing steady, and your mind anchored in your values, you protect the fundamental dignity of the exchange. You demonstrate in real time that intense disagreement does not have to equal relational collapse.
Wow.
You can face massive ideological challenges or project failures and still remain open, respectful, and coherent.
It just completely strips away the archaic need to win the interaction. The objective is simply maintaining your own internal architecture while you navigate the storm. If you don't abandon yourself, you've already succeeded.
You have maintained your coherence, and in doing so, you have invited the other person to find theirs.
I mean, our mission today was to map out the invisible architecture found in Chapter 2 of Leading with Presence. And I feel like we really did. We've established that this state of being is not a genetic gift, but a highly trainable structural skill.
Absolutely.
We've seen how the deeply ingrained habits of urgency and performance act as wrecking balls, draining our capacity and pulling us into a fractured, artificial version of ourselves. And most importantly, we explored the biological reality that our nervous system dictates our stability.
That's the core of it all.
Right. When the amygdala hijacks our logic to protect us, we fall into defensive reactions. But through the seemingly microscopic art of leveraging our breath and physical awareness to hack our vagus nerve, we can manually pull ourselves back to center.
We can take the wheel back.
And that internal physiological mastery becomes the foundation for relational trust, transforming conflict from a collision of threatened egos into a space where people feel genuinely met rather than managed.
It is the profound transition from merely reacting to the external stimuli of your life to actively, intentionally inhabiting your life. And as we close out this exploration, this actually raises an important question based on one of the most striking insights from the material.
Let's hear it.
The text observes that years from now, the people you work with and live with will likely forget the specific decisions you made. They will almost certainly forget the exact words you used. But their nervous systems will never, ever forget how it felt to be in your presence.
Wow, that is a staggering realization. We leave an emotional imprint on everyone we interact with.
So I encourage you to genuinely consider if presence and fragmentation are both highly contagious biological states. What invisible atmosphere are you unknowingly infecting your environment with today? And how radically would your relationships, your team culture, and your own internal peace change if you made the structural choice to truly inhabit yourself?
What an incredible challenge to carry forward. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the architecture of your own attention. We wish you the absolute best in recognizing those moments of activation, closing out those draining performance apps, and actively practicing your return. Take care of yourselves, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.
You've just heard a deep dive conversation exploring one of the ideas connected to my work on presence. I want to add one final thought in my own voice. When I speak about unanchored urgency, I'm not talking about every fast decision or every situation that requires immediate action. I'm talking about the moments when intensity begins making decisions for us. We react before we understand. We answer before we are clear. We move because the pressure feels unbearable, not because the next step is wise, responsible, or aligned. For me, presence is not about becoming slow, passive, or endlessly reflective. It is about remaining connected to yourself while something important is happening, connected to your values, remaining connected to the impact of your choices, being connected to the person you want to be when the moment is over. So the question I would leave with you is this. When urgency arises, what helps you return to yourself before you respond? That return may take only one breath, one question, one honest pause. But sometimes that small pause changes the entire direction of what happens next. I'm Danielle Body, author of Leading with Presence. Thank you for spending this time with the work.